Hello there, little one. What's your name?
I'm Heidi.
My name is Mr. Gordy. It's nice to meet you, Heidi. Would you like to be friends?
Sure, Mr. Gordy. Do you live around here?
I used to. A long time ago.
Submitted for your approval. A sleepy little town in Georgia. A town where the Wyrick family began a new life in late December of 1988. This new home? It was a previously abandoned one-story, three-bedroom ranch, and it seemed perfect for Andrew, Lisa, and young Heidi. But this idyllic setting, it soon gave way to an extraordinary and haunting tale. A few months after moving in, Heidi began to feel lonely, and at the tender age of 4, making friends in a new town was no small feat. That is, until she met Mr. Gordy in March of 1989. He was not the friend that her parents had hoped for. He was something far more mysterious. When Heidi told her mother about her brand new friend, an old man named Mr. Gordy, who had silver hair, he was dressed in a black suit, he had shiny shoes, and sometimes wore a hat like a pork pie, it initially alarmed her. Lisa feared a stranger had approached her daughter. However, as Heidi continued to speak about Mr. Gordy, it became very clear this was no ordinary stranger, but a friend from beyond. Welcome to Retraced Echoes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Retraced Echoes. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on social media, and visit our website at www.retracedechoes.com to submit your own stories. Now let's get back to Bert for our chilling tale.
Every day, Lisa would observe as her daughter Heidi would wander around their new house, as well as exploring their new yard. What stood out as weird is Heidi's tiny hand. It would always be held up in the air, almost as though she was holding onto someone's hand. Someone who was invisible. Now, each morning, Heidi would say that she would wake up to Mr. Gordy sitting on the edge of her bed. They spent the entire day together with a bond that was growing stronger by the hour. Now, initially, Lisa and Andrew, they thought it was maybe Heidi's way of coping with the brand new move. An imaginary friend to keep her company. Mr. Gordy seemed like a blessing, a comforting presence that eased Heidi's loneliness. But soon, Lisa's concern began to grow. You see, Heidi spoke of Mr. Gordy with such vivid detail, insisting that he looked and felt like a real person. When they held hands, Heidi said that it was like holding the hand of someone who had flesh and blood. These interactions became more elaborate. Heidi and Mr. Gordy would walk to the swing set where she would jump on and he would push her. As Lisa watched these interactions, something just felt off. It just didn't make sense. Sometimes she would wonder if maybe there was someone real that was behind the mysterious Mr. Gordy, manipulating her daughter from the shadows. Lisa's sister Joyce moved into the house right next door. As they helped her settle in, Joyce began to explore the public records as well as the sale history of the property just out of, if anything, pure curiosity. Now, in her search, a name immediately jumped out from one of the documents. James Gordy. It struck a chord as Lisa had mentioned Heidi's brand new imaginary friend named Mr. Gordy. Now, one thing to understand is James Gordy, he never owned the home. He'd only served as the previous owner's executor. In fact, his address was shown as 1529 Hilton Avenue in Columbus, Georgia. Now, intrigued by the connection, Joyce shared her discovery with Lisa. In doing that, the two sisters, they started to dig a little bit deeper and found that the house was once owned by a woman named Miss Kelly, who still lived nearby. Her family had owned the property since the 1900s. Determined to learn more, Lisa decided to reach out to Miss Kelly. When Lisa contacted Miss Kelly, she revealed that she knew James Gordy personally. He had been her mother's caretaker and executor, a very kind and dedicated man. However, he had passed away all the way back in 1974. Now, curiosity drove the Wyricks to delve deeper into the history and the mystery of Heidi's imaginary friend. They asked Miss Kelly if this mysterious figure, this man, resembled James Gordy, the man that Heidi had oftentimes described. She would oftentimes say an older man dressed in a black suit with shiny shoes who sometimes wore a hat. Now, Miss Kelly, she confirmed that it was indeed James Gordy that looked like this on any given day when he was alive. I actually have a photo of Mr. Gordy, Miss Kelly would say. Sure enough, there he was, wearing a black suit and a tie. The resemblance, it was uncanny. Seeing the clear connection between Heidi's imaginary friend and James Gordy, the family decided to dig even further into his history. James Scarberry Gordy, born on June 19th of 1888. He was the son of a doctor. For about 60 years, he owned and operated a real estate company in Columbus. He was an active member of his community. He served as a church member and Sunday school superintendent at Elson Methodist. That's the same exact spot where Miss Kelly had been one of his students. Mr. Gordy, he had been involved in the Columbus Chamber of Commerce and the Mount Vernon Masonic Lodge. He married Frances Josephine Ellison, and together they had 3 kids. 1 son, 2 daughters. James Gordy passed away at the age of 86. In fact, on September 25th of 1974. Now that was over a decade before the Wyricks even moved into this house. Yet his presence seemed to linger. That left the family to question the true nature of the entities that Heidi was interacting with. Now, James Gordy, he was buried in the Park Hill Cemetery in Columbus, Georgia. Some would whisper that he hid a fortune on the property, possibly stashed away during the Great Depression. It was speculated that this treasure may have belonged to Miss Kelly's mother, and perhaps Mr. Gordy was trying to lead Heidi to its exact location. The Wyricks was completely confused. None of this made sense. They had no rhyme or reason, no answers for anything. So they went back to Miss Kelly and asked if there had been any strange occurrences before they moved in, or possibly the house next door, since her family had owned both. Surprisingly, she said no, there was no unusual activity. However, the Wyricks' concerns escalated when another imaginary friend would appear. One day, Heidi heard the doorbell ring. She opened the door and encountered a man who called himself Con.
Hi.
His t-shirt
Can you come out and play?
was soaked in blood, and his hand was wounded, wrapped in bandages. Con then asked Heidi if she wanted to go outside and maybe play on the swing set.
I have to go ask
Heidi?
my mom.
She was curious, and she went to go ask her mom. When she told Lisa that
Mama.
there was a man at the door that asked her to go outside and play, Lisa was terrified. She rushed to the door, her mind racing.
Heidi, where is he?
Who was the strange man coming to the door and speaking to her
He
child?
was just here.
Lisa didn't hear the doorbell ring, and when she looked outside, there was no one there. Fearing for her daughter's safety, she immediately called Andrew at work and told him to come home. He needed to come home right now. Concerned that a stranger had approached their daughter, Andrew rushed home. He was consumed with anger and with worry. He looked around the entire neighborhood looking for a man that matched Heidi's description, but he found no one. From that day forward, the Wyricks made a brand new strict rule. Heidi was no longer allowed to answer the door. The fear of the unknown and the unseen had firmly taken root in their lives. As the mysterious events continued to unfold, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that Heidi, maybe she was experiencing more than just imaginary friends. The eerie presence of Mr. Gordy, it was too real, too tangible. Now she began to think that maybe, just maybe, Heidi was speaking to the spirits of those who had passed. And with Mr. Gordy, the evidence was undeniable. Historical records confirmed that he existed, and his connection to the property, that was clear. Determined to bring some type of clarity to the situation, Lisa decided to have a heart-to-heart with Heidi. She wanted to explain to her that Mr. Gordy had passed away many years ago. She was hoping that it would help Heidi to understand and maybe even let go of Mr. Gordy. The best idea she had was to take Heidi to the final resting place of James Gordy, and that was at Park Hill Cemetery. Their visit to the cemetery held a very eerie surprise. Although Lisa had no clue where he was buried and Heidi couldn't even read, the little girl led them straight to the chapel of the Pines Mausoleum. There, on the outer front, second level, space 115, the name James S. Gordy was etched into the granite. That was along with the dates, June 19th of 1888 to September 25th, 1974. Now back at home, the Wyricks invited Miss Kelly over once again. This time, she brought along a treasured photo album that had been passed down through all the generations of her family. As Miss Kelly is carefully turning the pages, she handed a few photos to Heidi, and almost immediately, Heidi pointed to one of the men in the photos
That's him.
and confidently identified that man as Khan, the same man who had appeared at the door, wounded and asking to play on the swing set. The room fell in silence with a mixture of awe as well as fear. Now, the man in the photo was Miss Kelly's uncle, Nathan Alonzo Batchelor. Now, the family knew him as Lonnie, or as Lon. Is it possible that Heidi had simply misheard his name? Now, Lonnie, he passed away in 1957 after a battle with cancer at the age of 73. But the story grew even more eerie. You see, Lonnie had lost his hand in a cotton gin accident before he was even 20 years old, which matched the description of the man with the injured hand that Heidi had saw at the door. Miss Kelly explained that Lonnie had lived next to the property that they lived at now during his teenage years, which again explained who he was and that there was a reason that they would see him on that property. As the supernatural occurrences became increasingly disturbing, the Wyricks knew that they had to take action. They had to do something. Their first step was to find a way to distract Heidi from the presence of Mr. Gordy and from Khan. In doing so, they came up with a genius idea, maybe a companion, maybe a dog named Sheba. Now, at first, Sheba seemed like the perfect distraction, offering Heidi a playful and energetic friend. However, it did not take very long for the Wyricks to notice something very odd. Lisa's niece, Bernice, she came to visit, and she observed Sheba growling and barking at empty hallways and at the closet. Now, at any given time, Sheba would become distressed inside the house, her eyes fixated on something unseen. The Wyricks hoped that taking Sheba outside would maybe calm her down. But one fateful day, when they let her into the backyard without a leash, Sheba bolted off and never returned. The disappearance of Sheba left the family heartbroken and more anxious than ever. It seemed that even their new furry friend was not immune to the strange and frightening forces that was taking hold in their lives. The Wyricks were now more desperate than ever to find answers to protect their daughter from the unseen entities that seemed to lurk in every corner of their home. Now, despite their best efforts, Mr. Gordy became a constant in Heidi's life. They became inseparable, spending every day together, with Heidi continuing her conversation with an unseen entity.
Hi, Mr. Gordy.
Now, for Lisa and Andrew, the presence of these spirits, they became a very troubling issue. Strange noises began to disturb their home. Objects would slide across the floor at the dead of night. Doors would slam shut with a force that would jolt everyone awake. The once quiet nights were now filled with eerie disturbances. One afternoon, Heidi had a play date over. Now, I should probably emphasize this was of the living, breathing kind, unlike what we've dealt with up to this point. But the visit took a very terrifying turn when the friend watched in horror as the living room chair was yanked across the room, almost by like an invisible force. Now, Lisa's nights, they were equally unsettling. She would often lay in the bed, listening to sounds above her head. On other points in time, she would hear disembodied voices whispering her name.
Lisa.
They would say, "Lisa,
Why are we here?
why are we here?" The haunting had escalated from mere curiosity to a living nightmare. The Wyricks found themselves thinking really long and hard about a very drastic decision. Should they abandon their home? I mean, the thought of moving was daunting, both financially as well as emotionally. It wasn't just about the expense, but uprooting their family yet again would be hard on everyone, especially Heidi. Now, Heidi, she never seemed afraid. She insisted that the entities were always friendly, which added another layer of complexity to the dilemma. The Wyricks were trapped between the terror of their haunting and the practical realities of their lives. One day, Heidi rushed to her mother. Her face was pale with fear. She was scared to death. She described a new menacing presence in the hallway, a shadowy figure that she just called the Dark Figure. Now, this entity, unlike Mr. Gordy and unlike Lonnie, it had a certain malevolence. It was vaguely human in shape, but she said it had no discernible face. Now, Heidi would say that she could tell when it was about to manifest based on the fact that the room temperature would drop. And a lot of times it would manifest in her bedroom, standing just silently, making the air frigid. And for months, Heidi said that she kept it to herself, but recently, the entity's behavior, it became way more aggressive. She would say a lot of times it would just manifest in the corners and just kind of linger. But soon, it began to interact with the physical environments, moving objects, and on one occasion, late at night, it even pulled Heidi's hair. What a scary thing for a little girl to experience. Now, with all of this stuff going on February 3rd of 1994, Lisa gave birth to a second daughter named Jordan. And with the arrival of the new baby, the paranormal disturbances, they only intensified. And in fact, they became way more aggressive. One day, Lisa and Andrew, they noticed scratches on Heidi's face, little thin lines that crossed her cheek. They tried to rationalize it. Could be a case where she was asleep and she scratched herself, or maybe she was outside playing and that's where they came from. They kind of dismissed the incidences as just typical childhood, mishaps, the normal, but in reality, they were just avoiding the terrifying truth. Now, everything kind of took a dire turn when the dark figure turned its malevolence onto Andrew. Now, Andrew was kind of known for his unshakable faith. He always believed that the only thing there was to fear was God himself. In reality, he'd even been a little skeptical of the entities inside the home. See, he'd never really had any experiences himself. He didn't really see any experiences, but that skepticism, it was shattered when the dark figure attacked him. One night, Andrew discovered 3 deep gashes that went across his rib cage. Now, initially, much like with Heidi, he just kind of dismissed it. It was just an accident, probably happened at work. That was until he found additional scratches on his back and on his chest. Now, each set of wounds, they were more disturbing than the last. To make things even more weird, there was an unusual number of blackbirds that was gathering outside their property. Now, this was a scary sight for almost anyone. And I've noticed in a lot of these stories in all of these different podcasts, when we look at the story of the Dandy House and we talk to Paul Kenyon, the house having a disturbing amount of flies and bees that had manifested. It's almost as though there's some type of energy that attracts these kind of things. But Andrew confided in a friend. He suggested the absurd idea that perhaps a rat was to blame for the mysterious scratches. Maybe it was digging for food in his skin at night. Which, I don't know what that friend was on, but that made no sense. But realizing that they needed professional help, Lisa reached out to Dr. William Roll, a renowned parapsychologist. We actually talked about him recently when we did the Seaford poltergeist story. Now, by 1994, the Wyricks had endured years of unexplained phenomena in their home, and they were very desperate for answers. Lisa connected with with Dr. Roll, through a local librarian who provided his contact information. Now, she had to make a call. Things inside of the house was not getting better and they needed help. Now, Dr. Roll was known for more of having a scientific approach to the paranormal, and he listened very intently to Andrew and to Lisa as they talked about everything that happened in the household up to that point. They talked about how Heidi had started out with this Mr. Gordy, and he found this very intriguing. He was somewhat skeptical. Maybe it was a coincidence. I think that'd be a very hard coincidence to have, but Dr. Roll ended up visiting the Wyrick home in September of 1994, and with him, he brought a series of photographs. Now, these photographs, they were portraits of 10 different men, all similar age, and one of the 10 was of Mr. James Gordy. Now, when he showed the photos to Heidi, she immediately identified James Gordy without even a hesitation, and that was a chilling confirmation of her own experience. Now, Dr. Roll later reported having spoken to Heidi and her parents that he was truly convinced that they were dealing with a genuine parapsychological experience. Now, the question would really be, and kind of what he's trying to dig into, is why this little girl? Why was she the center of such intense supernatural activity? None of that made sense. As a trained psychologist, Dr. Roll, he found no signs of mental illness in Heidi, so he ruled that out relatively quick. Now, she described the entities as looking and acting very real. She would even say that when she held Mr. Gordy's hand, it felt real to her too. Now, notably, Heidi had no prior concepts of ghosts when she encountered Mr. Gordy at the age of 4 in 1989. Now, Dr. Roll's findings, if anything, it provided some validation for the Wyricks, but it also deepened the mystery. The first thought that I had when I heard all of this was, is this really a case of an experience similar to the movie The Sixth Sense? Were they coming to Heidi to try to give a message or to move something along? What was it about Heidi that was attracting these entities? And more importantly, what could the family do to protect her? Now, again, you have to understand, Dr. Roll, he was a man of science. He wanted to try to point to everything scientifically and go, okay, well, that makes sense. That happened. Let's try to figure out what would cause this or cause that scientifically. And he had a ton of different types of equipment to do that. So they started going around the house and testing different things that was said. They found it very interesting. Near Heidi's room, they discovered a high source of strong positive ions. Now, that's commonly known to affect mood as well as perception. Now, one of the other big things that was talked about inside the house was the temperature fluctuations. And though they checked, they could never find that ever happening. He also wanted to wire the house with things that could detect and monitor magnetic field fluctuations. He thought that maybe that was causing some of the things, and that was not uncommon. Typically, when he noticed there was a spike in those areas, that those houses were typically considered haunted. Now, whether that's because it was causing different things to happen inside the brain and it wasn't really there, or whether the hauntings themselves was causing it. Either way, he wanted to see if it was there, and lo and behold, it was. The high magnetic field was found in Lisa and Andrew's room, and he theorized that the level of these spikes, they were so high that it definitely was affecting what the Wyricks thought they were seeing and what they thought they felt. Now, since he knew there was high EMF, now it's a question of why and how could this affect the family? Why would it affect the family? So he started conducting geological research in the Columbus area. He started examining local newspapers. And what he found was, from some newspapers from the past, was that there was a series of reported earthquakes that it could have possibly caused fluctuation in the Earth's magnetic field. So how did this affect Heidi? Well, he proposed a theory called placed memories, and that's a concept in parapsychology that suggests that a location can hold the imprints of past events as well as emotions. Now, with the electromagnetic field being fluctuated with this earthquake, potentially it could have affected Heidi's sensitive brain to pick up on some of these, almost like putting a needle on a record. Now, with Heidi's sensitivity to these things they called place memories, combined with the high ion levels that was found inside of her room, Dr. Roll thought that that could have contributed to her vivid experiences. Now, he reassured the family, hey, with all of this stuff going on, I don't think there's anything such as a demonic presence that's inside the home. He said that everything that he saw was almost as though there was a sense of love. Now, despite his confidence, Dr. Roll couldn't explain the physical scratches that was on Heidi and Andrew. And while Andrew respected Dr. Roll's, he felt that there might be more to the haunting than what he could see scientifically, or even what science could even uncover. Now, with Dr. Roll being there and investigating, it doesn't take very long, much like in all of the stories that we tell, for rumor to get out. There was rumors of paranormal activity that was happening inside the house. And of course, when you have paranormal activity, you have what? You have journalists. Now, one journalist, whose name will remain unknown, scheduled an interview with the Wyricks. As he approached the house, he felt a very eerie presence. Glancing up at the window, he was frozen in place by the sight of a dark, faceless figure staring right back at him. Terrified, he canceled the interview and fled the property. Now, another thing that we talk about when we talk about these hauntings is with the extra attention, in this case, there's the increased attention just because of the ongoing investigation. It seems to amplify these paranormal experiences, almost as though whatever this is feeding off of the energies that's inside the house. Now, at this point in time, years had passed and the haunting, it still continued. Now, Jordan, the little baby, she grew older and she too began to experience the supernatural. At just 3 years old, Lisa found her daughter speaking to an unseen presence. Now, this new entity, which was known as Phantom Girl, it also appeared to Heidi. Now, Heidi and Jordan, they described Phantom Girl as just a young spirit, probably between the ages of 4 and 8. It was often seen wearing a green blouse and a skirt. Now, according to the girls, Phantom Girl, she died in a car accident years before, a long time ago. Now, Heidi would oftentimes say that the spirit was harmless, but Lisa feared that, if anything, these hauntings would just continue to go on. They would never stop. Now, Lisa's sister Joyce, she couldn't even escape the eerie happenings that was happening inside the home. One night while she was at the house alone, she heard the disembodied laughter of a young girl echoing through the hallways. When she told Lisa and Andrew, they became desperate for relief. So, they turned to a new church led by Brother Stephen Shelley. Now, Brother Stephen, he was a firm believer in the presence of demons, offering the family very specific advice. He insisted that they were not experiencing a ghost, it was a demon. He assured them that through the power of the Almighty God, they could rid the house of these dark entities. Now, the Wyricks, they clung to Brother Stephen's words, hoping that faith and divine intervention would finally bring peace to their tormented home. The battle between the unseen forces and the family's determination to reclaim their sanctuary, it was going to be far from over. Now, despite what the pastor said, the family had one problem with his entire thought process, and that was that he jumped straight to demon automatically. They had told him about everything, even the fact that this Mr. Gordy, that the Lonnie figure seemed to be friendly. He still said demon, 100% demon, doesn't matter. This is demons trying to trick. And personally, coming from me, Bert, I can understand where you got to be very careful of that balance and line. But the Wyricks, they sought a more balanced perspective, so they called on Dr. Roll yet again. They felt a little bit better with his scientific approach, so they said, hey, we've got this other phenomena that's going on. Can you come back? And he agreed. Now, it should come as no surprise, Dr. Roll, once he got there, he wanted to start conducting the interviews yet again. He talked to Heidi. Heidi talked about an old woman's voice that she heard when she was taking a shower. And Lisa, she described hearing two demonic voices that was conversing in the bedroom. Of course, he heard all of this, and again, he thought it was likely due to the magnetic fields that was affecting their consciousness, maybe even enhancing their capabilities of ESP. Now, Dr. Rowe brought in a psychic medium, her name, Amy Allen, and she knew nothing about the Wyricks and nothing about their home. As soon as she walked in, Amy sensed the presence of a little girl and an entity similar to Mr. Gordy, whom she identified as a protector. However, she also detected 3 malevolent spirits that had fused into one dark entity. Now, Amy described these, I guess you would say, spirits, as 2 older men and a younger faceless male. Now, the energy surrounding them was negative and it was angry, but she clarified these were not demons, merely restless spirits. Now, following Amy's visit, Lisa brought in another psychic, which was from her new church. Now, this medium, though unable to see and communicate with the entities, sensed a constant battle between a malevolent spirit, likely Mr. Gordy, and a darker presence trying to attach itself to Heidi. Now, something kind of interesting, the church psychic identified a constant route taken by the malevolent entity, moving between the living room and the wall adjacent to Lisa and Andrew's bedroom. Now, this was the same wall where Lisa would oftentimes hear unsettling noises and voices. He also suggested that a portal in the living room fireplace connected the spirit world to their home. Now, desperate for peace, the Wyricks asked Brother Stephen Shelley to return and cleanse their house. Brother Shelley, he visited, blessing each room and even family member, hoping to drive off the dark forces once and for all. Now, Amy Allen disagreed with the Wyricks' approach. She urged them, if anything, to accept Heidi's psychic abilities rather than to mistakenly identify the spirits as demons. But that night, the terror escalated to all new heights. Heidi awoke in the middle of the night, screaming in fear. She sensed a dark presence at the foot of her bed. Her parents rushed into the room, and according to some sources, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Heidi was yanked from her bed, hovering upside down just a few inches from the floor, as if held by an invisible force. Now, eventually, she fell to the floor, leaving the family in shock. Now, for the Wyricks, this was the final straw. They decided to move, and after relocation, the paranormal activity subsided significantly during Heidi's teenage years. Now, Heidi has stated that she's no longer seen Mr. Gordy, but occasionally, she's still seen that dark presence. Many will say that Heidi is a psychic medium, and that she's able to see and speak and communicate with these entities whether she wants to or not. She herself has said that she wishes sometimes her life was a little different, that she didn't have these special abilities because her life would have been so much different, in a completely different place. Many people wish that they could see the things that Heidi can see. But unfortunately, people like Heidi, sometimes they wish they can't.
Thank you for stopping by and joining us for another episode of Retraced Echoes. We hope you enjoyed today's haunting tale. Be sure to check out all of our social media accounts for additional content. You can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes peeks. Don't forget to check out Bert's other podcast, Deceptive Reality, which he co-hosts with his friend Nick. Every week, they do a deep dive into unsolved mysteries that will leave you questioning the unknown. We'd love to hear your spooky stories. Be sure to submit them on our website. Your story could be featured in a future episode.
Well, everybody, until I see you next time, remember, stay safe. And also, the story's out there somewhere waiting to be retraced. Until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.